things that we felt violated Geneva Conventions. And then,
what sort of things are we talking about? What sort of things are we talking about then?
Well, we were using techniques like isolation, sleep deprivation, inducing hypothermia, using military working dogs. We used strobe lights and loud music for sensory overload. These things are all violations of Geneva Conventions for enemy prisoners of war. But when they had the congressional hearings after the scandal of Abu Ghraib, Donald Rumsfeld said that we were following Geneva Conventions in Iraq, which clearly wasn't true, and that meant to us interrogators that we were being sort of set up.
You obviously had some sort of crisis of conscience at some stage. What provoked that?
Well, we were having problems with this all along. We were having moral problems, but we were being told to use these techniques, and we believed they were legal because of the guidelines issued by the Pentagon. So if you're issued an order, and it's a legal order, you believe it to be a legal order, you have to follow it. But once the scandal broke and we heard Donald Rumsfeld saying that we were following Geneva Conventions, we no longer used harsh tactics. And then when I returned to the United States, I went to the media. I also went to criminal investigators to report the things that I had done and some of the things I had seen. And I certainly saw much worse things than what I described to you. Units out there were interrogating detainees and breaking their bones. They were burning them. You know, these people had contusions and cuts. It was pretty awful.
We have to take at face value what you're telling us, Tony Langarinas. I mean, obviously, you appear sincere, but we can't vouch for our viewers exactly what you're telling us. Do you ever perhaps think there may be an argument, a case for some of the coercive techniques that you've described to as sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation? For instance, I'm sure you're familiar with the argument that there may be a case sometimes if you torture someone, let's not beat around the bush, if you torture someone and they give up information which subsequently goes on to save, who knows, dozens, scores, hundreds of lives, American lives, any lives at some subsequent time, then that torture was worthwhile. Is it ever worthwhile in your view?
Well, I think morally, no. I think that morally we should reject torture entirely. But if you want a practical reason not to torture, I can tell you that 90% of the people that I dealt with, at least 90% of the people that I dealt with, were completely innocent of anything. And, you know, these were people that we were using. How can you be sure of that?
How can you be sure? I mean, you know, you're an interrogator, not a judge.
You're right, or a mind reader. I should correct myself. We didn't have any evidence that these people had done anything. We didn't even have like a good reason to suspect that they had done anything or had information. But there was a belief in Iraq that everyone knew who the insurgents were and had information that we could use to shut down the insurgency. So it sort of justified torturing everyone, and that's sort of what was happening. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the prisoners that I got, he was arrested at a checkpoint because he had a shovel in his trunk and a cell phone in his car, and they suspected that you could use the shovel to bury an IED and the cell phone to detonate it. That was the only evidence they had against this guy. That's not enough to arrest somebody, and certainly not enough to justify using the harsh interrogation tactics we were using.
Does it change anything in your mind, though, that the harsh interrogation techniques you just described would have been much harsher under Saddam Hussein's regime, and the kinds of techniques you've described, horrific though they sound to many people in the civilized West, in Iraq under Saddam would have been far worse?
Well, I don't think that mitigates our moral responsibility to not torture a prisoner. You know, in international law, torture is the only human right that you can never violate. Even the right to life is not inviolable. There are certain circumstances where you can put somebody to death, but international law says you should never torture people, and I think that should be a moral standard that we should hold. I don't think that we need to compare ourselves to Saddam Hussein.
When we think back to those pictures...
But if you want other practical reasons to... I'm sorry?
No, carry on. Make your point.
Well, if you want other practical reasons not to torture, I think that if you're trying to shut down an insurgency, it's the wrong thing to do, because you're actually fueling the insurgency. You're fueling the anger of the Iraqi people, because everybody there, they were either in custody themselves or they knew somebody, they had family members. This creates a lot of anger against us. Not to mention the argument that torture often produces bad intelligence.
Well, you've only got to think back, haven't you, Tony Langarinas, to those pictures, of course, that we all remember that were beamed across the world of bodies being stacked up, people being put through all kinds of contortions, for comic value, really, pictures being taken. The American authorities, of course, took action against those who perpetrated those activities, but obviously the propaganda defeat was there. Do you think it's still as bad at Abu Ghraib, or has the act been cleaned up?
Well, actually, the Abu Ghraib got cleaned up almost immediately after the scandal, and continued to get cleaner and cleaner as the year that I was there went along. But as a result, the detainee abuse moved outward, and the detaining units would start torturing people in their homes before they were brought into the prison, or they would take them to a remote location and torture them there. And often that torture was far worse than what they were doing at Abu Ghraib. Well, I mean, Abu Ghraib was horrific, and it just became much more commonplace throughout Iraq, because they didn't believe that the interrogators in the prisons were going to be able to do their jobs.
We know the Iraq War is
the job as torturer.
Yeah, we know the Iraq War is hugely polarizing for the American people. Midterm elections coming up, it's going to be a key issue, and hugely polarizing even for people who've served like yourself. What do your erstwhile colleagues make of what you're trying to do now? Do they consider you to be a traitor to the cause almost?
I'm sure that there are some people who would feel that way, but all of the feedback that I've gotten from people that I served with has been very positive, frankly. The people that I served with, they feel the same way that I do.
Tony Lagaranis, a former US Army interrogator. We appreciate your time. Thank you.